the planning and zoning commission order. A motion to approve the agenda for August 2nd, 2021.
Motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We get a motion to approve the minutes for March 29th, 2021. During the chaos of everything that had happened that day, they hadn't gotten recorded.
They were actually on the website as well as posted, but did not get approved by planning and zoning.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for March 29th.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the minutes for the July 19th, 2021 meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from July 29th. meeting.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Fence permits. There is the ordinance. And that is there something you want us to pay attention to in that?
I think it's probably a good idea to look at charging a possible fee for doing this, and then requesting that they come in and not do like the backside of a napkin drawing, but at least kind of put, sketch something out on paper
Okay.
that we can append to the application itself for the permit. I know I looked at Dyersville and their permit fee is $15. So, and it was also that amount from the community that I came from. So I think that's a reasonable amount to ask.
We had discussed this at one other point as well, a while back. I don't think it's unreasonable to charge for permit fees. I mean, charge for building permits, and it takes time from city staff to do all that stuff.
How much are the building fees?
Building permit or is it?
Building permits are based on square footage. And then there's a review fee as well as an issuance fee. So it's kind of hard to compare those, but definitely, I mean, there's a $10 issuance fee on the building permit. So
Are we looking at a $15 permit fee and then a $10 issue fee for events?
That's totally up to you.
Do you need an issue fee? Just charge for $15 for the permit
for the permit as well as the issuance.
for everything, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be fine with that. That way they gotta show you what fence you're putting up and everything.
I gotta have something.
Yeah, and it's always good as a liability standpoint too, but somebody puts up a fence and someone gets hurt, and it usually comes back to the city, well, you didn't approve the fence. You can also charge the same fee if someone does put up a fence and doesn't come in and pull a permit. So you could actually double it.
Not even a bad idea.
Non-issue.
What would that be up to the city council then to double the fee, or what would that be? Or just if we make a motion for that, that's what they do? I mean,
I think it's your recommendation.
I don't think those are that big of a deal.
no.
So can I get a proposal to approve a $15 issue fee and a $30, call it a $15 issue fee and a $15 fine
Yes, a penalty.
penalty?
I'll make a motion there for a $15 issuance fee. And then basically another $15 fine if they don't get the permit.
I'll second the motion to approve the $15 issue fee and $15 penalty.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
I think it's kind of crucial too that we talk about requesting a drawing so that
Oh,
we see what
yeah.
they're doing.
A sketch,
Yes.
go back and add the sketch to that vote, if everybody's okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
One more thing about the fence permit, I noticed that it requires the city administrator's signature on them, and I don't think that's necessary.
City staff, any city staff? Or
I think just who issues the fence permit or any permit.
just want a clerk's signature?
Really. I mean, I can continue if P and Z would like me to sign it.
What happens with the building permits? You have to sign every one of them too?
No, I don't sign the building
Dean
permit.
does all that stuff, I think.
Dean does?
Was.
Is Dean signing that?
He's not signing off on the building, but he's definitely signing off on the excavation. permits
Excavation
as well.
permits, that's correct.
Yeah, and curb cuts and different things like that. He, obviously, he has to review these. So, but I think you could, yeah, you could have him, or you could have, what, if it's submitted to the clerk's office, again, that would allow probably any one of us in there at City Hall too.
What if you did public works director, city administrator, or their designee?
Sure,
That way, if Dean's not around, or, that way, if he's not around
somebody can
and
capture
you're
it.
not around, it opens the door to anybody in the clerk's office.
Okay with that?
I'm with that too.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else with fences? Rezoning application. Set a public hearing date for the rezoning of Birch Creek acres annexed to lots. The lots running off of Cox Springs. I believe there's 4 of them
Yes,
need to be rezoned to residential. We'll do that on our next meeting, or we need a special meeting for that?
Let me throw out a question while you're thinking about that. Every cities do these a little different. You guys are gonna make a recommendation when it comes to rezoning. So it makes sense that you have public input, but the council by code has to have a public hearing by law. You don't have to by law. So when you're setting these public hearings, you're entitled to do it. You aren't legally required to do it. And so, for example, I'm just looking at the agenda here, you're setting a public hearing on the Birch Green Acres, but you haven't held and aren't looking to set a public hearing on Deb's rezoning application, right?
We haven't discussed.
Just discussion. So I guess my point is you're free to set a public hearing and ask for public input before you make your recommendation. And in a lot of ways that makes sense, but you aren't obligated to. But the city council, when they get your recommendation, even if you've had a public hearing, they must schedule a public hearing before they make a decision.
Can we do dual ones like we did for Callahan's again?
Remind me to, I think over there,
Yeah.
I don't know why you couldn't. The council has to meet some deadlines. When they publish public hearing notice, it has to be published at least 4, but not more than 20 days in advance. Or do you guys post? Post. So it
and publish.
has to be posted and published at least 4, not more than 20. So we'd have to take that into account, scheduling a joint public So you could do that, schedule a public hearing for whatever council meeting Annette might think would be the city council public hearing date, and the P and Z would meet first, if you will.
Why would we have to do this? Is there not already houses on these, two of these properties?
The one.
Okay, so why do we need to have a public hearing?
Yeah, you don't have to.
We don't have to, the council will have,
Council will still have to by state code.
but I was thinking we could probably knock out that and the other one at the same time. That one.
But, yeah,
I have a question. That was brought up at the last meeting. About asking the P and Z to rezone those from ag to R1. And it got tabled. So how can they set it for a public hearing if you guys haven't even approved that?
Because you don't need approval to have a public hearing, we can approve it after the public hearing.
Okay, so
Was there a motion to rezone that got tabled, or was there just discussion and it got tabled?
It was just tabled, there was no.
Yeah.
no-
yeah,
Which is common practice, again, technically speaking, when you table something, it means there was a motion and a second and discussion, and you didn't want to make a decision, so you tabled it. A lot of times councils and boards will just talk about something and we'll never get to the motion, say, let's table that because we need more information, which sounds like what you did. Even if you did table it, you could table it and say, you know what, we want public input before we make a decision. So you could table it, still schedule a public hearing, and then bring it off the table for discussion. In this case, what you really did is postpone a decision on it. Wasn't technically tabled, but that is what a lot of councils and boards will use, so it's not wrong. Just
I guess my question is I was told that they have to go through rezoning, just application and get their zoning back. So and that's not what they're doing. So do I have to go through mine the way I'm going through it? Why is
Yeah. Well, and you and I talked about that, Deb, when we met, when I was still up here in the office. Usually by city code to rezone, the normal process is a property owner files an application to rezone, pays the fee, it gets set, et cetera. Sometimes, and I use that loosely because again, every city is a little bit different. When there's an annexation, sometimes the city council can on its own motion, or the P and Z can on its own motion, pursue the rezoning of a property. Whether the property owner wants it rezoned or not. I mean, then it could become adverse, but in your case, you could say, well, we annexed that property. There's a house on it. It's subdivided to be houses. It makes sense that it's going to be houses. The comp plan says it's supposed to be residential. So let's start that process to rezone it. That wouldn't be unusual either. So it's not right or wrong. It just, and that's a little bit similar on one hand, different on one hand from the issue we'll get to with Deb here in a minute. But you guys can initiate a rezoning upon your own desire to do so, or a property owner can seek the initiation. And in this case, I think the initiation started at city level with the residential lots. It started with Deb on her lot. And you could have started that, you could have initiated that without Deb asking for it as well. So it really comes down to whether you want to schedule a public hearing.
I don't see that we need to schedule our own public hearing. I think it'd make more sense to do all that stuff together with city council. Be my personal opinion. I don't know. I'll keep that open for discussion.
can we do that like you're talking to city council thing and say we recommend during the proceedings?
I think
We have to do it ahead of time.
No, I think what you would, in my opinion, if you want to do it that way, where you kind of have them the same night meeting and then you can chime in too. I would say that, and still, it's going to sound weird, but the council stuff's a public hearing too. So let's say Monday night, next Tuesday, the council schedules a public hearing, whatever day that is, on these rezoning applications. We'll figure what day that would be tonight. And then you could schedule your meeting right before them, schedule your public hearing. And then you would hold a public hearing, take people's opinion at the end of that, close the public hearing, and then make a recommendation to the council. And then the council, your meeting would adjourn, their meeting would start. When they got to that on their agenda, they would open their public hearing, accept any more comment, or if the same people could make comments again. Then they would take into account your recommendation and they would make a decision.
Yes, I just don't understand why we're having a public hearing.
Yeah, you don't have
There's
to.
already a house there,
Yeah, you don't have to. The council does no matter what.
but why would they even have one when the house is already there? It
Well-
has to be zoned.
It doesn't have to be. The house could stay there on ag ground and be considered a non-conforming, legal non-conforming use. So it can stay.
Doesn't an ag have to be so much?
Yes, to be legal conforming, that would be legal non-conforming, which means it can stay. It just doesn't conform to the zoning classification it's in.
So why would the public have any
They probably won't.
opinion?
They probably won't have, there probably wouldn't be any resistance. But here again, state code doesn't require you to, but state code does require the council schedule and hold public hearing.
So it's not just.
Yeah, it's not the city code in this regard. It's a state code requirement, chapter 414, I think.
Well, that makes sense.
Makes sense, but doesn't.
So Doug, could they make a recommendation and to the board,
To
to
the council.
the council, to go ahead and do the rezone based on comments from the public hearing? I mean, could we put a letter together
I
tonight
know
for the next?
I think if in the event this group wants to have a public hearing, we could try to schedule it so it fell right before the council meeting. They would hold their meeting right ahead of the council meeting. I mean, the council could be there in the wings, if you will. They'd open their meeting, have the two public hearings, make recommendations on both of them, close the meeting, and now the council has those recommendations. And then on their agenda, they would hold their public hearings. So on Tuesday night, the council would presumably anticipate that they're going to get these recommendations on whatever day that would be. So they put that on their next agenda. So
Question, how come you aren't taking everybody in on that? Should be rezoned? Like you're doing 4 lots, but you're not doing business call, you're not doing, the substation or Peosta is. Why aren't we grouping that under the same thing? Because it's considered their use, like Mrs. Call has a house there, she's R1.
that's not for me to decide. I'm not directing that ship at all. You aren't gonna get rid of the substation. They probably don't care what they're zoned. You know what I mean? They're not going anywhere.
Non-conforming right now.
Right. And the other house, Mrs. Call,
Yes.
yeah, I don't know why that hasn't come up as far as something to be on the agenda, but you've come up because you want to be. These other 4 lots, because I think they're newer, there's 1 or 2 houses and there's 2 that are ready for.
One house was being built, or it was already done before the annexation was done, so that was.
Yeah, but I think those,
Given.
One, I brought to the council's attention, or Doug's attention, it's got a building permit and being non-conforming. So this is why the city is bringing it up, so they can be legal.
I think those other lots a developer would have trouble selling those lots to build a house on without the zoning changing. Mrs. Kolb's case, her house is already there, so it's not going anywhere. So there's it's not as emergent, but it should probably be changed or looked at.
So what is Doug zoned?
Ag. Because under the city code, which again is very consistent with a lot of codes around the state, when property gets annexed, it automatically becomes ag.
Right?
Yep.
And what do you want it rezoned? You want to put up more mini storages, correct?
It would need to be C2 or industrial to be permitted under the code.
And nobody's gonna put a house there either, correct?
Well, she owns it right now, so she'd have to let that happen. I mean, it's her property, so nobody can put a house there unless she wants one there. Yeah, but we can get more into that issue in a minute, but as far as, I think your initial decision is, do you want to have public hearings or not?
We gotta make a recommendation to the city council at some point.
Yes.
That's fine. We've done that in the past.
And that on Tuesday, if the council would schedule a public hearing to get publication done, it would have to be, it could be then at their very next meeting, right?
Yes,
Which would be when?
the 24th.
If you guys wanted to do that similar fashion as you did once or twice, you'd set a public hearing for August 24th at council meetings at 6, right?
Yes,
So you could do it, I'd say at 5:45 maybe, or just right ahead of them, or you could do it at 6 and the council could start a few minutes late, one or the other.
15 minutes, enough time.
Well, if you're gonna do two of them, you might want half an hour. Again, I don't think you'll get hardly any input, probably.
That's what I'm gonna guess too.
So maybe 5:30 if you wanna shoot ahead a little bit.
Well, then I guess make a motion to set public hearing dates for Birds Green Acres annex lots and also plan unit development.
August 24th.
For August 24th, 5:30 PM.
At 5:30.
Yeah,
I don't know what your thoughts on the PUD. You won't get much input either. I don't. Okay.
Question, Doug, on that setting public hearing for the plan unit development, the PUD.
Yep.
What does that do to zoning for Mrs. Call, me, and the substation?
If and when a PUD, and we'll cover this in a minute too, but if and when it would then make all uses that are inconsistent with the PUD legal, non-conforming, meaning they're legal, they can stay, but they're non-conforming, so they can't grow or change. When I say change, you can't add on to them, you can't build more. If Mrs. Kolb's house, if a storm came through, city code here says if it's substantially damaged, it couldn't be rebuilt. Usually it's 50, but Peosta code says 75%. So it'd have to be almost wiped out to not be rebuilt. So that's the difference between legal conforming, legal non-conforming. Legal conforming means it's legal and it meets our code 100%. And you can do whatever you want as long as you follow that code. Legal non-conforming means you can keep it, but you're limited on what you can do. If it, you can't grow it, you can't make it bigger, and significant damage, then you got to comply with the code. So in Mrs. Kolb's case, just for example, if a tornado came through and destroyed that house, she would be stuck with it being ag zoned unless she came in and said, I'd like to rezone it to residential, which she probably, or somebody probably would at that time, or commercial, or they'd make a request for something ag.
In the PUD?
Well, if the PUD is approved, then they'd be stuck with the PUD ordinance, whatever that was. Yep.
So she would have to go and rezone in the PUD as a, or.
No, I'm sorry. If the PUD was approved and her house would stay there as a legal non-conforming and it got destroyed, then the PUD ordinance would dictate and she'd have to try to amend out of that or amend to change the PUD for that area of the PUD.
So she could change it to R1 in the PUD.
She could ask that, absolutely. And I don't know, maybe the PUD has that corner as a legal use for R1. I'm not sure.
It does, as last I've seen. but
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Mhm. But what does that do to me?
In what way? Sorry.
The PUD versus if I rezone to commercial?
Can we cover that in a minute? I mean, unless we're kind of jumping around.
The PUD is what I'm saying, and they don't.
Well, they're scheduling a public hearing on it here. They aren't approving it.
no,
Scheduling public hearing.
And then the PUD, like any other ordinance by code, you make a recommendation by code, the council is supposed to have 3 separate readings, giving the community a lot of time to come to 3 different meetings. Now, the council can waive that requirement by state code. Again, you're really only supposed to waive it if there's kind of a real reason to an emergent situation. Get done quick. Usually I'd say 2 things. One, it really needs to get done quick and there's no opposition. Because if you waive the second and third readings and approve something really quick, you're taking the public's ability to comment out of the equation. And if people find out about it later and they aren't happy about it, they're gonna be angry. So if it's something simple, non-controversial, and there's an emergent need, usually it's not a big deal to do it. When it comes to things like a PUD and zoning, those would be, most cities would say, we never rush those because those are things that, you know, maybe there's a neighbor that was out of town on vacation. And they missed the first reading, the second reading. Now they see the third one, like, wait a minute, I don't want a mechanic shop in my backyard. So that's the reason for that 3 reading thing. If you've got an intersection in town that had a stop sign and the stop sign's been there for 25 years, doesn't say there's a stop sign there. That's something normally you'd fix in one meeting. You'd waive the second and third readings and pass it because everybody knows it's there. But you need to get it in the code because you're writing stop sign tickets. You can't really write them because it doesn't say there's a stop sign there. So.
Okay, we're back for public hearing dates, August 24th at 5:30.
I had a motion by Johnny.
A second.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And that public hearing, whoever draws up the public hearing notice, you can, it was one motion, but it's 2 different things. So you can either clarify that in the one notice, but maybe have 2 big headings. So it's real clear.
All right, Peosta mini storage zoning application. I'm gonna turn it over to Doug.
You make it.
To give me a timeline on how this all happened.
I'll make just a few comments and have to answer any questions and turn it over to Deb for her comments too. Clearly. So the annexation application, some of this you may not think, may not be relevant to you until I talk a little bit more, but just kind of the background of this whole area. There was an annexation application that included the Peosta mini storage property that Deb's requesting be rezoned. That was filed on April 24th of 2020. And that was, annexation was approved, not just her property, but other surrounding properties on July 14 of 2020. Around that same time frame, on April 28, 2020, there was an annexation agreement that was prepared for consideration by the council between Peosta Mini Storage and the city. That was approved by resolution on April 28, 2020. So the pre-annexation agreement got approved on April 28 and the annexation was finalized on July 14, both. The city adopted a comp plan that had been discussed for quite some time on May 25 of 2021. Updated the zoning map on June 8, 2021. And that was something I recommended when I was here just because the other one was so out. The PUD has been under discussion since November of 2020 and became a formal process in February 2021. Deb filed an application for a building permit to add on to some of the mini storages on June 17, 2021. And an application to rezone on July 1, 2021. Some things I will, I guess we've covered these a little bit, but your job is to eventually make a recommendation to the council on what they should do with this zoning amendment request. When you make that, then they schedule a public hearing, hold a public hearing, and consider the approval of an ordinance to change the zoning. On the pre-annexation agreement and the annexation process, it's not, as you guys know, Deb's buildings, mini storage was there when it was in the county. When it was in the county, it was zoned under the county zoning ordinance. When it gets annexed, it automatically falls under A1, as we've discussed. 2 things are kind of common. What's most common is A pre-annexation agreement actually has language in it that says, when this is annexed, the city will amend the zoning classification to whatever the city zoning is that would be consistent with what its current use is. So in this case, it would be under C2 or industrial, either one works. A lot of times you'll see that in a pre-annexation agreement saying that's what will happen once I annex. Sometimes that's not in there. And typically when it's not in there, a lot of times there's still an action by a P&Z board to say, well, we need to address that. In this case, neither one of those things happened right away. There's nothing in the pre-annexation agreement. And there was no request immediately either by the property owner or the P&Z to do something with that. It just kind of sat out there. The county zoning is really of no relevance. Okay, once it becomes annexed into the city, the county zoning doesn't matter. It only matters what the use is, and you guys looking at the use and just between you making a recommendation to the council, deciding whether or not that current use should be zoned to that use. Is it what the long-term goal is for that property, or should it be zoned something else? And that gets into the PUD, and I'll touch on that here in just a second. The taxes, a lot of people get confused by, if I go to the assessor, it says my property's commercial. Assessors tax by use. They don't care what zoning is. So they only look at usage. So if it was zoned industrial, but you had a house, they tax it as residential. So that how the property shows up on the beacon or how it's taxed is irrelevant. You folks under state code, when looking at a zoning request, must consider a comprehensive plan. Doesn't mean you have to follow it, but you must consider it. You have to consider what the comprehensive plan suggests, or I would say dictates, because it is a plan. It isn't a law that you're supposed to give consideration. And if you stray from it significantly, you need to kind of identify why you've done so in your discussions or in your minutes. Your comp plan is approved, it exists. So that's something that would have to be looked at and considered. The PUD is not done. So the question is, well, that's not done. Does that mean anything? Do we consider that? Can we consider it? Or is it illegal to consider it? Should we not consider it morally, whatever the case may be? The law is pretty clear that if the PUD, so long as the PUD wasn't commenced to get in the way of somebody's zoning request, it can and should be considered. Again, it doesn't mean it has to be a deciding factor, but it's legal to consider the PUD if it was something that was underway, being talked about and planned about, independent of, in this case, Deb's rezoning application. So for example, if there was no talk about a PUD and Deb came in and said, I'd like to rezone my property to commercial, and the council's like, oh, I don't like that. Let's start a PUD process. That wouldn't be legal. But that's why the dates become important when you guys think about the relevance. And that's why I pointed out, based on what I've been told, because I wasn't really involved in this obviously early on, but discussions began in November 2020, and there was some formality to that process in February 21. And the building permit and application to rezone were 4 to 5 months later. So I think whether you or the council can legally consider what the PUD is proposing. Doesn't mean you have to follow it, but you legally could consider it. I looked at the future land use in the comp plan for this area. It is civic. Okay. It's not residential, it's not commercial, not industrial, not ag, it's civic. And I think the reason it was labeled that way is because of the PUD being under development. And that was going to, in the end, decide exactly how it would maybe be, I'll say laid out, using that term loosely, but between residential, family residential and commercial and park, all those things. The civic category kind of covers that PUD being under development. I don't know the comp plan inside and out by any stretch, but it probably speaks to the fact that there was a PUD, but I wouldn't swear to that. So questions on any of that, or if not, can Deb an opportunity and, or just ask Deb questions, whatever you'd like to do.
That wants to say something there, I guess. I'm trying to find out.
Just to give the history on this whole thing, how it came about. I had no idea that I was going to get a comp plan that did not show my mini storage on it. I was not notified. I came to the meeting when they disposed it, because they never discussed it with me. They went ahead and decided to do a PUD on it. Never called me, never invited me, never wrote to me, had no contact. I had to bring it to RDG attention that, why am I on here? Go around me. It was after the fact that they approved to go ahead with the PUD that I found out I was in it. And again, no communication from the city. I was not notified. I've been there since '97, operating this for 25 years. And I had thought, I should never assume, but I was told by Whitney that you get your use back. I did not know that you had to go to rezone it and go through these steps. Do you think I would have annexed into the city of Peosta, not knowing I'm gonna not get my use back? That I could never put up another building? That I could never put a building back together if a tornado came? This is my source of income. And the city is impeding my business to grow, to service the citizens with storage. And then I have to go through these steps to gain my business back. And you know that the city has not contacted the Birds family one time. They put this PUD, this comp plan, I understand comp plan, you don't have to contact anybody, but they put this PUD together and did not have one contact with the Birds family or myself at the Peosta mini storage. They don't own the land, but yet they spent $124,000 on a PUD, which may never even happen. The property's not for sale. And they took our tax money and spent $124,000 to make this pretty picture.
I was at a meeting with you and your brothers at the PD where the PUD was talked about.
After it was decided, but I was already in it. City decided to do a PUD plan on it, then we were notified. Operating backwards. I think everyone who's sitting there in my position would have never annexed in it if you knew you were going to get your zoning back.
I guess I'm gonna ask the question that for you or Annette. What good is that PUD if they own the property or not willing to sell to the city? You know what I'm saying?
Well, you know, it's definitely a long-term vision in a way. Now, a good chunk of the property, the lower 40 acres, somebody else owns. My understanding, and another 10 acres, somebody else owns. Conversation with those guys, they're willing to work within the PUD. So long as the birds refuse to sell, they can keep farming it and keep the commercial use there. Yeah, until it would be sold. So it just come down to whether or not a developer comes along that is willing to pay enough to convince them to sell and then follow the PUD or not. So it could sit there.
So why didn't we have a developer come in first before a PUD? It's kind of-
That's a, nah, I wouldn't say it at a PUD arrangement. I'm not sure if it's nice to think that way, that's a lot of times a developer buys property and moves forward. In this case, I think going through the comp plan, and I wasn't part of it at all. You can see on the planning and steering committee, council, everybody on the front page who was, but I think the idea is that Peosta is a very growing community. What's Peosta want or need that you don't have, and where would it best be situated?
$124,000.
I don't make those decisions. And I don't know if that number, and I don't know if that number's wrong.
Council,
Yeah, I don't know if that number's.
$123,000 some odd dollars.
The point being that, and I don't know all the procedures that happened leading up to that and through the comp plan process, but there was decisions that Peosta needed a town center, needed a downtown, needed a something that didn't exist. Now, you may not agree, but, and I'm not taking a position because I don't have to.
Dollars, no?
So in the end, it's not at all out of the norm for there to be a plan put in place for a property that the city says, you know, in the city limits, the city has what's called police powers, and it's not like the police driving the cars, but the ability to make decisions and planning for your future. When it comes to planning and zoning decisions, the city's, as part of the city's police powers, and they have a lot of flexibility to make those decisions. And the council, through this planning process, has landed on that is a good spot for this residential growth and city center and park environment with a lake and with trails. And, you know, they jumped through a lot of meetings and open houses, maybe not enough, maybe too many, depending who you talk to arrive at that point. But that's why they have public hearings and why you guys provide your input to decide if it's right or wrong. That money that Deb's referring to, that money's been spent, so that's not going to change. It's just, is the plan good for the long term of the city? And it is one of those things you have to weigh. This isn't legal, it's just the political side of it. You know, the interests of the community as a whole and the future of the community versus the current property owner. You know, because, you know, Deb has property rights too and interests, and the city has their interests. So, you know, where do you land in making those decisions? Those are, you know, Deb's comments and comments from the public, whether, you know, supporting Deb's position and her statements, or saying that regardless of Deb's position, she should be allowed to stay there but not grow, and the PUD is the right thing to do. Those are the kind of things that the public or others can be heard at that public hearing. And unfortunately, you probably won't see a lot of people because it just doesn't happen. But I think that PUD open house had good attendance. I wasn't here, but I heard it had good attendance. I don't know if any of you came to that, maybe just for the dilly bars. So anyway. But the next process, the steps will be, you've set the public hearings on these issues for August 24th on the rezoning of Birch Green Acres and the PUD. The Peosta mini storage rezoning application that isn't really, it's listed on your agenda. It doesn't say to make a recommendation or to set a public hearing, so I'm not sure what was intended there.
It was intended to be voted on last meeting and this meeting.
Okay. And like we discussed earlier, set a public hearing on the other annexation. You can on this, you don't have to, just like the other one. I would say from a consistency standpoint, if you're going to set a public hearing on one of the rezoning, you probably should have, or don't do either. But again, you're not obligated to have a public hearing.
Basically,
So if,
I'm asking for approval from the board that I get my C2 zone.
if she doesn't get the zoning and stays ag, or once that place, that's.
Then whatever,
going down.
then whatever the PUD, if that happened, it would go from ag to whatever the PUD said. And I don't know exactly, but I would guess it would show residential. That doesn't, it would go back to then her use would still be legal non-conforming. But that would be limited. She couldn't,
Yeah,
yes,
and she can't, owns a property and can't build on it, basically, what I hear.
yep.
But mind you, I never got notice from the city that I was being put in a PUD.
So we can either vote, set public hearing date.
Once that PUD, if it does get accepted or voted in, a way to change any part of that then.
You still can, it would be a rezoning application to modify that too. But I would say, it's just my perception. If it doesn't get changed now, if the council doesn't move forward with the change in depth zoning to C2 and the PUD gets approved, now you have that residential overlay. I think getting it changed would be unlikely. And like I said earlier, with the,
That's
go ahead.
exactly why I wanted to change before the acceptance.
Yeah, and with that said, like I explained to you, and the PUD, in my legal opinion, can be considered. You don't, even because of the where it is, because of where it is in timing and planning, doesn't mean you have to go along with it, but again, legally you can consider it. So could the council. Whether it's T's are crossed, I's are odd, and it's fully approved or not. So.
I didn't even get a vote whether I wanted to be in a PUD or not, so I didn't even know it was happening. I don't know why they just didn't go around me. They could have. Could have been around the structures that were already existing.
Does that have anything to do with the traffic on Bird's Road as
No.
far as, I mean, going past the school, but they're trying to eliminate traffic?
Well, and I don't know my streets, so somebody help me out. Deb, you would know this one because there's been some discussion, but there's talk of, in the PUD, it shows, and again, that's a concept. It won't necessarily lay out the way it shows, but it shows a street going through your current storage, your mini storage property. And if it goes through as it's shown exactly, it would go through a building. So
Buildings.
2 buildings. So as far as adding on to those buildings, when the street's shown to go through there, now that street might not go through there for 50 years, might be 5 years, I don't know. So, but that's,
what I'm saying. We don't even know if this is even gonna happen. So on speculation, I have to sit and wait and not build, not grow. How can the
Where-
city possibly think that way?
Where are you thinking of putting that building?
I'm adding on 2 buildings, the short one and then
This one being the tall one on the backside, and the short one being,
the one before the theater on the left hand side. Third building. Shortest one there.
yeah, I'm just trying to think about
That's
later on.
So-
I've been in there.
this building, that building's gonna be, would be in the way no matter what with that street.
Yeah.
This one might be or might not, depending on how that curved down through there.
Okay, let me ask this, it's a dumb question, but, okay, let's say it does go into effect in 5 years, these buildings are there, do they have to buy her land to put the street in? Or,
It could be condemned and they'd have to buy it, go through an appraisal process. Yeah.
Yes.
But I mean, in order for them to come through, they would have to buy my property and my buildings. And I don't know why I didn't come through, because Bird's family property isn't for sale, they can come through the road in. The cornfields on both sides of the road, there's no way for it to have that expense, city tax dollars.
And I don't know that the city's paid for roads in Peosta. I think it's been developers and they've got some incentives on the backside after they do it and develop. So not saying the city would condemn to put a road in, but the city can do that. And I think it's probably right until there's a reason to put the road in, it probably wouldn't go in. So, which would be, somebody would have to buy the property.
Yeah, the property has to be sold.
Yep. Yep.
So at that point, is it worth restricting her from being able to build, even though she owns the property? What do you guys think?
She's got the properties there already. So she's putting up something new. Can we add it on to this year?
We can.
Put it this way, even though the council's not gonna schedule a public hearing. They're not gonna have their public hearing until that night anyway. So it's not gonna slow the process down if you schedule a public hearing for that night like you did the other ones. Because if you made a recommendation tonight at their next meeting, that's when they're gonna schedule their public hearing for anyway. So if you wanted to treat it the same as these, you could do it that way.
And can we make recommendations for all of these of whatever?
Yeah, on that, the 24th, is that the date we said?
Yeah.
Yeah, after you have your public hearings, then you would vote to make recommendations and the council would be aware of those recommendations that night before they held their public hearing.
It ain't gonna slow nothing down here by doing that.
No.
What's that?
I said it won't slow nothing down by pushing that public hearing for the 24th, because the city council will have it at the same time immediately anyway. Because they're gonna have the public hearing too, that's what I'm understanding, correct?
Correct.
So to wait on voting, whether my zoning is gonna be C2 or
They could do,
voting tonight that it's.
they could do two things tonight. One, they could vote tonight and recommend that it be C2. Then next week, the council would schedule consideration of that recommendation for a public hearing on August 24th. Or they could schedule a public hearing on your rezoning request for August 24th. Hold their public hearing and make a recommendation, and then the council would still consider it that night. Either way, the council is gonna have a public hearing on the 24th.
Right, but if they make the recommendation tonight and go to council at the next meeting before the 24th.
They still have to have a public hearing.
Yeah, they'd get the recommendation sooner, but they're still gonna schedule the public hearing for the 24th.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yep. So either way, there will be a public hearing on the 24th before the council. And I'm not putting words in their mouth. I mean, that's the quickest they could do it.
Let me ask you this. Say we would say, make a motion, make it C2. So that don't restrict her from building, and the planned unit development does go. The only way that's gonna go up there is when they sell the property.
The plan unit development would have to change.
Or would it?
Because they would have to make their
It's-
drawing to say that.
Or it's, I don't say it's messy, but it's kind of messy, because if tonight you recommend that it goes to C2. And the council considers that a public hearing on August 24th. Then it's gonna be kind of a timeframe, maybe when weeks of each other, then the PUD may get approved. And now it says, now it's residential. In theory, because, or, I mean, your recommendation, put it this way, if you recommend that Deb's request be granted, that she be C2, you're also really recommending that the PUD accept that. And working, like Deb said, go around it and leave her C2 right there. That's really what you'd be recommending if you say, we're aware of the PUD, we're aware of the comp plan, we're taking all that into account, and we think Deb should be zone C2. And our recommendation is you take that into account in making your decision on her request and the PUD. So there is just a lot of play right now, but
still asking for discussion on whether you guys want to vote or set a public hearing date.
I actually thought tonight was gonna be a vote. Just the fact that last meeting was tabled to, it said 25 years of business. And I'm told I can't.
I personally don't agree. If you own the property, you can't with it myself there. But I understand the planning and development, this concept, you know, I do like the way it looks. But it ain't gonna happen until Bird's family sells the ground. At that time, with the mini storage be sold to them. I mean, this is 50 years from now, 20 years from now, whatever. I mean, how,
I don't know how the city can be in a position to buy my property and buildings, to be honest with you. It's tax dollars money. And it's tax dollars money that's going to, the city doesn't have these kinds of means to start buying businesses and doing a line of energy.
Well, that's not gonna get bought. That ITC is not getting bought. That's not moving anywhere.
And are you gonna put a house next to that? I mean, I see commercial property there is fine. I mean, I'm even gonna gain some money that the city pays me to come through. And I don't wanna even spend my tax dollars on that. And I'm gaining. And I don't want my house taxes to go up because of it either. And I don't want yours to go up. Because you're buying out business. Because it won't be cheap.
nothing ever is. I don't know what you think, Matt.
I mean, I'm looking at it all here, Deb, and just knowing what it's being used for. It's hard because I definitely understand Deb's position and where she's coming from and wanting to grow. But then I also understand that, you know, we've all discussed the community development, how this plan would change things with that. I mean, it's really a difficult decision because I mean, I can understand both sides. And trying to decide what the right thing to do is for everybody involved. It's challenging, and that's why I mean, I personally like the idea of a public hearing to hear input from others. And to be consistent with what we are doing with the other 4 lots. So I guess that's kind of how I see this, but.
So we just
Andy, you got
Take a
anything? Any thought? We,
I mean, I agree with that. You know. The only thing is we have an application here for Doug's and not the other ones. That's the only thing is,
Yep, was that in last week's?
I wasn't here.
Yeah.
The applications for these two were in.
No, we had.
no, they wrote the letter.
Oh,
Yeah.
There was some.
okay. So that's, okay.
I guess I have a question for Deb. Has there been any discussion or conversation about the mini storages being located elsewhere? Or, I mean, has there been any discussions about moving them anywhere else, or has that been the only site that?
They asked if I would relocate. They've asked if they came through, I said, just move me south. I don't want to be on both sides of the road. I want to be made whole, which you don't want to have your business on one side and half on the other. And, you know, I was on the PUD plan for 1.29 acres, which tried to squeeze 8 buildings in that is like impossible. Like I said, relocating is an option. Be relocated on my own property. Like I said, go around me, I don't care. Put a berm up on the other side of me, it'll be a speed. But I've been trying to put up some buildings the last 2 months. When I found out that, I called Doug and I seen this map, the new zoning map. And I called Doug, I go, Doug, this map ain't right. It's like, why is that? Everything's ag, and we got 4 lots of long birds that are R1, and then this is all R1. And at that time, Doug, you said, I'm glad it brought it to my attention, or we'll bring it to council and address it to them that it needs another step. Which means put everybody back to their use. I thought it happened, so I went put my building permit in. And not even know it not even happened.
You thought the zoning change happened? Even, I mean,
You said there was one more step that needed to be put on that map, and that was all the other rezonings.
yeah. And I know we met and talked. Obviously, I know you were the planning and zoning maybe chair on the board for a while. The change zoning takes, it's a step, but it's not, snap of fingers and it just happens on the map. Now it's changed. You have to go through a process clearly. And I don't have all the background. I didn't have all the background on Peosta about and I mean, that got me to ask some questions. And, I think I knew through city staff when we were getting the map updated, that it wasn't we weren't updating it to change things, merely updating it to have a current map. So we could see where things were.
But it was just of that area.
What
It
was,
was just of the Birds family area that got updated.
I don't think so.
It did brought out.
I think there were a few other things that got, I'll say, fixed that hadn't been changed over there. But regardless, my intent with that was, I was here for a very short time and I thought the city needed an updated map, so you knew what you had. So that was the goal with that. But we did talk definitely that something needed to happen. There needed to be another step, and that goes back to my earlier comments that a lot of times that's zoning is addressed in the pre-annexation agreement, and it wasn't. Maybe by clearly by oversight or mistake, if you want to, very well could be. I don't discount what Deb's saying in that regard. And a lot of times, as soon as the annexation happens, councils or P&Zs can take it upon themselves to start that changed process. It didn't happen, and I can't speak to why. It wasn't hurting anybody for it not to happen, probably. I mean, Deb was going along with her business. The field was getting farmed. The lady was still living in her house. People still lived in their new house, and somebody's gonna build. I mean, there was no negative impact until it came to light, either with the updated map that we did and or the deeper PUD discussions that started suggesting that there could be issues with those old land uses.
And as far as the plan, it may not look anything like that.
I guess looking at the map though, knowing that there's a dead end road at Bell Drive, just thinking of the connectivity. I know how Burton Road is very traffic heavy. I guess from that perspective, I don't know what can be done different there, but it does make sense to connect the road to there. And that is going to cause the property to be split in relation with your business. I guess that's the question, whether or not business can also get those are existing.
I would say it's pretty clear too, if that property develops,
Correct.
that road should be extended in some fashion, some way. Would it have to be? No, but it would sure make sense. So tonight, you're either gonna make a recommendation tonight that the council will consider at a public hearing on August 24th, or you're gonna set your own hearing for the 24th, then make a recommendation for the council meeting on the 24th. So just a matter of recommendation tonight, or recommendation on the 24th. Either way, that's the recommendation the council will consider on the 24th.
Or you vote on it.
That would be the recommendation. Yeah. Yep, either vote to recommend it be changed tonight or make your vote on the 24th before the council meeting.
Don't speculate on what's gonna happen 25 years from now. Or what's gonna happen in the next 10 years. So I'm not gonna wait 10 years to be stalled in my business. If I told each and every one of you, you can't have a raise, you can't use all of that. I'm just trying to make sure that we're trying to make my property what its use is. It's been there before any of you guys live here. Without being negative, it's just nice.
I don't think it's gonna hurt anything to get public input on the 24th. We can't give council an answer before then. I mean, doesn't matter if our answers now or what's the TMS before the meeting. It's not gonna make a bit of difference to them.
So we want to make a recommendation for all these on the 24th before the public hearing. Are we gonna know our answer by then?
Nobody shows up, saying let's sit both we are right now. But, yep, there's me.
There'll be people
Chance.
there,
Yeah, but I mean, you know, it's not us put more input in, but they,
there'll be legal people there actually.
But we can give our recommendations. Are we gonna know what our recommendations are that night? Are we gonna go with? Or are we gonna?
I'm sure I know what my recommendation would be at the moment. But it'd be, you know what public hearing is.
Right.
Make sure that we're doing what we need to do.
I don't wanna be put on the spot like the last one.
Oh. You don't come into it this time, you're getting put on the spot.
Yeah, if you have a public hearing, receive public comment, close the public hearing, and then it's, if you say, boy, I'm just not ready yet, you don't,
I think you were there that night, cause I was kind of scared.
But, so on the 24th, I guarantee it, Deb will want you to make a recommendation, and not give it more thought, but again, that's your choice, I mean, as a board.
We'll have her to provide her recommendation as well. She was at the last meeting. So, I mean, I'll make a motion to schedule a public hearing for Dan's application on August 24th. Public hearing.
August at 5:30.
at 5:30. Second,
I'll second.
all in favor?
Right.
Well, residents, that is addressed by the community, correct?
Yes.
So we
Yes.
don't need to technically look at that
No,
at this point.
we'll take a look to be sure, but my memory is that the PUD has that being residential,
That's our,
but I'll take a look, or Annette can take a look.
What was the question? I
The
haven't.
called resident.
Yeah, I've got to go look that up. And what is someone?
Civic,
Civic.
it's defined in, there's a definition, it's kind of open-ended.
center-ish.
Yeah, again, and this would be a question for RTG more than me, but I think they probably labeled it that way due to the fact that the PUD was under construction or consideration, and that's kind of an overall civic plan center. Because I don't think the entire use is designed to be, public buildings, for example. Find the page here. The page 39, if you would go to the you don't have to go to it now, make a note of that. It's on the city website. Page 39 is the future land use map. And then after that, moving forward, it defines kind of different zoning classifications and what they look like. Getting there. Civic is on page 47. Two civic classifications provide space for educational, institutional, assembly, and other public uses, including medical campuses, cemeteries, airports, landfills, water plants, and utilities. Fewer compatibility considerations under civic and education, greater compatibility considerations being what all you put in there next to each other if you're talking water treatment, et cetera. But residential uses, educational, public, private, and parochial institutions, K-12, other government or nonprofit organizations and accessory uses. So when I read page 47, the description of civic, it's very general in my mind and doesn't necessarily meet everything being looked at in the PUD. So that would be a question that we'd want to pose to RDG maybe a little bit. Again, my gut tells me they put civic on it because the PUD was in play and that was going to fine tune it and become an amendment to this, which is, if that gets approved, is basically will get appended to this as an amendment. So that would be my guess why it got put in that category as opposed to a specific classification like commercial, industrial, residential.
Have any other business we need to discuss?
Question for Doug, on the annexation, if you don't mind.
Yep.
The city did state that they were bringing sewer and water to the property for the mini storages. It has to be done by October of this year.
Yeah,
So they have plans, can I see them?
No, I think you've been made aware there are no pending plans. I talked to Annette tonight that being in the plan is something that should happen.
What's that? I'm sorry.
That is something that should happen.
Yeah.
I don't know if you use sewer or water, but either way, they should bring it there.
So the kind of, it's the annexation.
Yes.
We're following that, we're following.
Nope, it should be brought there, and then if you need it, it's there for you to connect to. So that is something that should be looked into. There is in the comp plan, just another on page 55 is where it shows kind of the very basic sketch of the PUD and how that has played out since then. So that is on page 55 of your comp plan too. And it shows the Below Drive extension you talked about.
Seaface Hardware driveway, is that where the?
That's just a temporary driveway.
Going in there.
Actually, off of Birds and off of Peosta Street, so. Yep, they're gonna do it.
Turn off Piazza Street.
Pardon me?
They're gonna have lanes off Piazza Street. Close.
The stop sign. It's never on the road.
Get your name and address.
167 record.
All right. And motion to adjourn,
Almost.
I'll second.
all in favor?
Aye.